The ring came home on a cold Saturday in February. Victoria burst through the door laughing, holding her left hand high so the diamond scattered winter light across the hallway I had painted butter yellow the year she learned to walk. I was at the kitchen table paying the winter gas bill, the same scarred oak table where she once did finger painting while I stirred soup. I set the pen down, wiped my hands on the apron she used to hide behind when thunderstorms came, and opened my arms. She let me hold her for exactly 2 seconds. Then she stepped back and the warmth began to leave the room. His name was Harrison. Old vineyard money, new entitlement. His mother wore camel cashmere and spoke of the estate before she ever asked if I wanted sugar in my tea. That evening we sat in the living room where the Christmas tree still stood half undecorated because Victoria had been too busy. She spread glossy folders across the coffee table, the Rosewood Estate, marble terraces, a glass conservatory that rented for more in one evening than most people save in a decade. I touched one photograph gently. "Will there be room for the little fairy lights we used to string in the garden?" I asked. Victoria smiled the way you smile at a child who is asked to bring crayons to a gala. "Mother, Rosewood is perfection. Harrison's family has used it for generations." I poured tea no one drank. I watched her fingers trace the marble floors in the brochure and felt the first small invoice land somewhere inside my chest. The weeks that followed were quiet charges. Small deposits for convenience, taken from the joint account she still had access to. Texts that ended with "I'll pay you back" instead of love. Dinners cancelled because Harrison's mother needs to approve the linen samples. I told myself it was normal. Brides borrow more than dresses. Mothers lend more than money. That is the silent agreement we sign the day they take their first breath. One evening in March she came alone. She sat on the edge of the sofa, knees together, hands folded the way she used to when she had broken something expensive. "Mother," she said, studying the carpet instead of me, "Harrison's family feels the wedding should reflect their legacy. It might be easier if you let us handle the finances from now on." I waited. The grandfather clock ticked the same rhythm it had ticked through every hard conversation we ever had. She finally met my eyes. "I'll send the invoices to you. It's simpler." I remember tasting metal in my mouth. I remember smiling the small, harmless smile widow's perfect. "Of course, darling," I said. And the first real bill settled on my shoulders like cold snow that would not melt. April arrived soft and treacherous. The cherry tree outside the kitchen window bloomed the same pink it had the year Victoria lost her first tooth under its branches. I watched the petals fall while envelopes began arriving almost daily. They came in thick cream stock with the Rosewood Estate crest embossed in gold. Floral deposit, $18,000. String quartet, $9,400. Lighting designer, $12,500. Each one marked final notice, though I had never seen the first notice. Each one addressed to me alone. I laid them in a neat stack beside the salt cellar on the kitchen table. I paid them quietly from the household account Victoria still believed was joint. I did not ask questions. I simply signed my name the way I had signed permission slips and college checks and every hospital form when she was small. One warm afternoon I drove to the Rosewood Estate unannounced. The gates stood open for a tasting. Victoria was there in linen and pearls, Harrison's mother beside her, pointing at marble columns as though she had built them herself. They did not see me at first. I stood beneath the magnolia and watched my daughter walk the terrace that would soon carry her wedding train. When she noticed me, her smile thinned. "Mother, we're in the middle of a walkthrough." Harrison's mother did not turn around. I said I only wanted to see how beautiful everything would be. Victoria sighed the way you sigh at a delivery person who has arrived on the wrong day. The events manager appeared and gently guided me toward the gate. "Mrs. Langford, Perhaps another time. The bride has a very tight schedule. I let her lead me out. The iron gates closed behind me with a soft, expensive click. That night I sat in the dark dining room with the growing stack of paid invoices. I ran my thumb over the gold crests and felt the years of lullabies and fevers and first heartbreaks fold themselves into a very small, very heavy place inside my chest. I made tea I did not taste. I looked at the photographs on the sideboard, Victoria in pigtails, Victoria blowing out 16 candles while I held the cake steady. And somewhere between the second and third photograph I stopped waiting to be thanked. May pressed warm against the windows. One evening I went to the attic to find the box of Victoria's baby clothes I had promised the shower guests could touch. Behind the cedar chest, wrapped in oilcloth and tied with the same faded blue ribbon I once used for her hair, lay the small iron box my husband pressed into my hands the night before he slipped away. I carried it downstairs and laid it on the kitchen table beneath the lamp we had used for homework and hospital bills and every hard truth we ever faced together. The lock opened with the little brass key I still wore on a ribbon beneath my blouse. Inside were share certificates, bank folders, and one thick cream document folded like a love letter. I unfolded it slowly. The deed to the Rosewood Estate, signed in 1912 by my husband's great-grandmother, transferred solely to me in 1998 with a single quiet line added in his handwriting the week before he died. Should anyone ever send Eleanor an invoice for doors she already owns, remind them whose name is carved in the marble they walk on. The estate had never been sold. It had only been leased, year after year, to strangers who believed they were buying grandeur. Every lease, every renovation, every marble floor Victoria walked that afternoon had been quietly paid from a trust that carried only my name. At the bottom of the box lay a second envelope. Inside was a single sheet in his careful script. My dearest Eleanor, if you are reading this, someone has forgotten whose hands kept every light burning. The rosewood is yours alone. Let them plan their day inside your walls while they still remember kindness. Close the doors when they forget. All my love, always, Charles. I read until moonlight moved across the table and laid silver on the paid invoices. Then I read again by lamplight, tracing the boundary lines with a finger that no longer trembled. I closed the box, laid my palm on the cool iron, and felt the house breathe with me for the first time in months. That night I began moving reservations the way moonlight moves across still water, slowly, silently, leaving no trace until morning. I kept the original deed on the table beneath a vase of white peonies that opened and closed with no one to see. Some nights I walked the long hallway touching the walls Charles paneled himself. I left every light burning because darkness felt too forgiving. The brass key still hung warm against my heart like a second, steadier pulse. And every morning I laid the deed beside my teacup and watched the light move across the embossed crest that had never belonged to Harrison's family at all. I was no longer paying. I was simply waiting for the final invoice to arrive. June came in warm and deliberate. I rose early, made coffee I barely tasted, and opened the iron box each morning like a quiet prayer. I laid the original deed in the center of the kitchen table, weighted with the same crystal vase that had held my wedding roses in 1978. I telephoned the Rosewood Events office from the village library on Thursdays when Victoria thought I was at bridge club. I used the soft, slightly confused voice of a widow who just wants to be sure everything is perfect for my daughter. They told me everything: final balances, cancellation policies, exact times the gates would open, the private owner's entrance no one ever used. I wrote the details in a small pearl gray journal, the color of the dress Victoria had chosen for me months earlier. Page by page the journal filled with quiet thunder. At night I moved reservations the way fog moves across the valley, slowly, completely, unseen. Florist rerouted. String quartet quietly reassigned. Lighting designer paid in full and released. Never enough to raise alarm, always enough to matter when the final bell rang. Victoria came once in July. She swept in wearing linen and new certainty, carrying fabric swatches and seating charts. She spread them across the kitchen table without seeing the deed beneath the vase. I poured tea she did not drink. She looked up and noticed the pearl gray journal. Her smile thinned. "Mother, you're not still writing checks, are you? Harrison's family is covering the rest." I stirred my tea once, twice. "Just keeping track," I said. She laughed the way you laugh at someone who still balances a checkbook by hand. Then she gathered her swatches and left without noticing the peonies had been changed to white, the exact shade of the dress she would wear when the gates closed. That evening I stood before the hallway mirror and practiced the small, pleasant smile that made venue managers and accountants tell me their secrets. I practiced walking in the pearl gray silk dress I would wear on the day. I practiced carrying the framed deed wrapped in tissue the way I once carried Victoria's birthday cakes, steady, proud, unbroken. August arrived golden and final. The last invoices came, smaller, hurried, marked urgent. I paid them all from the household account she still believed was joint. Some evenings I sat on the porch with tea that steamed only for me and listened to the cicadas speak in small, forgiving waves. I was ready. Not angry. Simply ready the way dusk is ready long before the first star appears. It was a Tuesday in late September, the kind of gray morning that makes the kitchen feel smaller. I was at the table buttering toast I would not eat when the courier rang. He handed me a thick cream envelope with the rosewood crest and left without waiting for a signature. Inside was a single sheet. Final balance due, $42,000. Below, in Victoria's hurried handwriting, "Since you're no longer coming, please settle this today. Thank you." I read it twice. I laid it beside the cold teacup and looked at it for a long time. The house was so quiet I could hear the grandfather clock clearing its throat in the hallway. I rose, walked upstairs, and took the pearl gray silk dress from its hanger. I laid it across the bed the way one lays out clothes for a christening or a funeral. Then I opened the iron box, removed the original deed, and carried it downstairs. I placed the deed on top of the invoice. The two documents looked oddly peaceful together, one demanding payment, one proving it had already been made for over a century. I made one phone call. To the private number printed on the deed's last page. A woman answered on the first ring. I said only, "Execute the owner's clause. Effective this morning." She replied, "Yes, Mrs. Langford. The gates will recognize only your signature today." I hung up. I wrapped the deed in soft cream tissue, tied it with pearl gray ribbon, and placed it in the small leather satchel I had bought for the occasion. Then I dressed slowly, pearl gray silk, pearls at my throat, hair swept low the way Charles liked it. I did not hurry. I drank the tea while it was still hot. I left the $42,000 invoice on the table beneath the crystal vase, unpaid and unnecessary. The drive to Rosewood took 20 quiet minutes. The gates opened for me before I reached them. I parked in the owner's space no one else ever used and walked through the side entrance that had my family's initials carved above the lintel in 1912. Inside, the staff greeted me with small, knowing bows. They had been waiting for this day longer than Victoria had been alive. I smiled the small, pleasant smile I had practiced for months and asked only that the champagne stay chilled until I rang the bell. Then I took my seat in the rosewood-paneled study that overlooked the marble terrace, laid the deed on the desk like a place card, and waited for the bride who believed she had uninvited the one person who could open every door. The marble terrace shimmered under October sun. 200 guests in silk and linen drifted beneath the glass conservatory, waiting for the bride who had paid nothing and owed everything. I watched from the study window as Victoria arrived in clouds of lace, veil floating like a question she no longer knew how to ask. Harrison's mother adjusted the train as though she had sewn every pearl herself. No one looked toward the owner's wing. The string quartet began the processional. Guests turned. Victoria stepped through the great French doors that had opened for my own wedding 45 years earlier. She smiled the smile that had cost more than most houses. Then the doors closed behind her with the soft, final click of well-oiled brass. They did not open again. A hush moved across the terrace like wind across wheat. The quartet faltered. Victoria reached the top of the aisle and realized the conservatory doors were locked. The florist, the planner, Harrison's mother, all of them, tugged at handles that would not turn. I rose from the rosewood desk. I took the framed deed from its tissue, held it against my pearl gray silk, and walked the private corridor my great-grandmother had walked in 1912. The staff parted without a word. I stepped onto the terrace through the owner's entrance. 200 heads turned at once. The only sound was 200 people drawing one breath. I walked slowly down the 3 marble steps and stood in the exact center of the aisle Victoria had paid for but never owned. I lifted the deed so the morning light fell full on the 1912 signature and the quiet line added in 1998. "Good afternoon," I said, voice carrying without effort in the sudden stillness. My daughter asked me not to come. She also asked me to settle an invoice for $42,000. I paused long enough for Victoria's veil to tremble in the small wind that always moves across that terrace at noon. "I have come to settle both requests." I turned to the events manager who stood pale beside the locked doors. She produced the master key with shaking fingers. I took it, laid it on the marble balustrade, and left it there. "This estate," I continued, "has never been for sale. It has only ever been on loan to those who remembered kindness. The loan ended this morning." Victoria's bouquet slipped from her fingers and struck the marble with a soft, expensive thud. White petals scattered like small apologies that would never be spoken. I looked at my daughter across the widening silence. I did not smile. I simply inclined my head the way women do when the past has finally been paid in full. Then I turned, walked back through the owner's entrance, and closed the doors behind me with the same gentle click that had welcomed brides for 113 years. The terrace remained locked. The wedding moved to the lawn under rented tents that sagged in the afternoon wind. The photographs show a beautiful bride, but everyone remembers the closed doors and the woman in pearl gray silk who walked away owning every memory the marble held. They say the lawn ceremony was lovely in its hurried way. The string quartet played beneath a rented arbor. The cake was cut on a folding table. The marble terrace stayed empty and sunlit, waiting for no one. Victoria came to the house one December evening when the first snow began to fall. She stood on the porch in boots and the same coat she wore at 17 and asked if the French doors at Rosewood would ever open for her again. I made tea. We sat at the kitchen table where every important bill had once been paid. She cried without sound. I passed tissues the way I once passed her crayons. When the cup was empty she whispered, "I thought it was ours." I looked at her for a long, steady moment. "It was mine to lend," I said. "You simply forgot to ask." She left without the coat. I hung it in the closet beside the pearl gray dress that now lives in light instead of shadow. Some evenings I drive to Rosewood alone. The gates open for me without a sound. I walk the marble terrace at twilight and listen to the fountains speak in small, forgiving circles. The house is quiet, the way very old houses become quiet when they remember who they truly belong to. People ask if I am lonely. I tell them loneliness is a terrace where no one sends you the bill for standing on it. It is surprisingly peaceful. The last laugh is never loud. It is the soft closing of French doors on a day that believed it had uninvited the owner. It is the quiet click of a key left on marble for someone else to find. It is an old woman walking her own corridors in pearl gray silk, knowing every light was paid for long before anyone asked her to stand in the dark. If this story rested somewhere gentle inside your heart tonight, stay a while longer. The kettle is warm, the terrace is quiet, and there are many more evenings when a woman remembers she was always the house, never the guest they tried to send away. You are safe here. You are seen. And that, my dear, is paid in full.